Hello everybody and welcome back to another Toonkind at 12 FPS. My name is Avi and I'm here with another solo FPS. And this time I have been left alone with no audience, which means I am free to do whatever the hell I want. Anyway, this one is called Business as Usual. As normal, I have pre-written this entire FPS. The link you can find below in the description. But yeah, let us just jump right into it. There is a gathering happening in the attic of Legree Cafe. It's not unusual, though. The attic also doubles as the room of a certain Arata Satomi, and Satoru Ashikaga is not opposed to him inviting his friends over. When he'd first moved in, Satoru had been surprised that his young charge ended up making such friends so quickly, perhaps even encouraged them to stay for as long as they like. Of course, this was also during the period of time when Satoru had considered Arata to be more of a delinquent and had hoped that good friends would keep him on the straight and narrow, but a good place to hang out goes a long way regardless. As such, whenever Arata and his friends want to relax, or if the spirit rogues need a place to hunker down for a quick meeting, the attic is always made readily available for them. A table has been pulled out per the norm, and chairs have been gathered along its side. Snacks and drinks are splayed out on top of it, as well as several books, notebooks, and various other items of entertainment. It's not really a tea meeting, at least not yet, but there is something about all of them being gathered in this spot that is comforting. A home, a makeshift family, and the conversations between them. But even so, Arata finds himself lost in thought. Maybe it's the fact that he feels safe with them here, and much more secure in their presence, that he can bring himself to pause and reflect on everything that has happened since the start of the trip. After all, things have been happening. That's all he can really say on the matter. So many things happening in such a short span of time. Azumi turning himself in, his subsequent release, his downward spiral and eventual recovery, and throughout all of that, amidst it all, the underlying issue of their current mystery. What brought Azumi back from the dead? And whatever it is, can it be trusted? Is it really tied to those odd happenings around Okashima? He doesn't know for certain, but he's got this weird gut feeling. A potato chip hits his cheek, snapping him out of his thoughts. Arata blinks, turning to look at the offender. Story to Arata? Ryoto, who is sitting backwards in a chair with one hand still holding onto the bag of chips, asks with a raised brow. What's with that look on your face, man? Sorry. Arata laughs sheepishly, rubbing a hand at the back of his neck. Ugh. Got lost in my thoughts, I suppose. What were we talking about? A palpable silence fills the room at that. If he were a toon, Arata would probably have visible sweat drops appearing over his head right now. It's a good thing he isn't, and a good thing he isn't an Inkwell either. He's fairly certain the rule of funny would be out to get him, even if he is a real kind. He watches as the others share a look. Guess we're all thinking a little too much, huh? Adea mumbles. Yuina nods in agreement, crossing his arms as he leans forward in his seat. It's a bit difficult to stay in a chipper mood with all that's been happening, I suppose. Wince. They'd all agreed to meet up in order to have a little bit more fun before Arata had to leave again, but here they all are, still considering the pressure of what all has been going on around them. I was asking you how Azumi was doing, Minori asks after a moment, and she readjusts herself with a sigh. You've spent the most time around him out of any of us, after all. Did that, treatment go well? Yes. Then they all seem to be worried about the same thing. It's almost a relief to see the concern etched so clearly in Minori's face now that he thinks about it. Some part of him had been worried that the contention that had existed between the spirit rogues and Hatsumi back before the detective had died would lead to even more conflict now. But seeing that some of them have already not only begin the process of moving on from it, but reach out as well, brings sort of relief to an anxiety he hadn't entirely realized was there. He supposes, for a moment, that despite the strangeness of the situation, Izumi's revival has brought a way to bring closure for all of them, for one reason or another. Tensions still exist, yes, but at least they're all trying to find a way to resolve it. And it's all he can do when Arata shrugs. Ooh, sorry. I was mostly on the outside while it was happening, so I don't really have full context to all that went on. But for the most part, it seems that he at least is doing better than he had been. Hopefully he'll stick to the forward momentum. More like he's probably too stubborn to fall off it now, Ichika snorts, not even looking up from the project of tangled wires and scattered metal bits laid out in front of her. Guess that means we're going to be seeing more of him now, huh? You better not spend all your time insulting him, Ichika. And Minori sighs again. What? Wouldn't dream of it. We can't dream anyway, Yuina points out. I don't know, Ryoto says, a mischievous grin finding its way onto his face. I think if anyone's got the right to dunk on Hatsumi, it's Ichika. Her and Hatsumi. What? Hatsumi blinks in surprise, looking up from her book. Me? Adea nods in agreement. Oh yeah, I see what you mean. He's got a point. Genevieve rolls his eyes. Why is that what we're focusing on here? It's a relief to know that they can still be this casual, even now. That this is what their friendship is, after all. The comfort in the downtime, the relief of taking off the mask and knowing that there are others around him that won't judge him for it and feel the same in turn. That despite all the things that are going on, the seriousness of it all, they can still find it within themselves to take it easy. Of course they'll get through this, the air in the room says. They have each other to rely on. Now that he thinks about it, though, Arata thinks, not for the first time, how Azumi managed on his own up until now. He wonders if he's still doing okay, if he's recovering well after the Mindscape experience. Part of him wonders what exactly happened in there. Well, if it's important, Azumi will tell him eventually when he's good and ready. Funny. He can still trust him on that. Can Azumi say the same about him? Isabella's still out, right? Arata asks eventually, glancing between those gathered here. No sign of the android. She's spending time with Ichia-san. Adea answers. Seems like they've been making good progress together lately, too. Arata nods at that. To hear that creator and creation are slowly rebuilding their relationship, that their enemy turned friend is doing well, doing better, is relief in and of itself. Something about it makes him hopeful. Why'd you ask? Wondering if we should go over everything we know, Arata says with a sigh, rubbing a hand against the back of his neck. Maybe we'll come up with something, but I didn't just want to start that without her or Seikichi around. I mean, Ryoto starts glancing between who all is there. I don't think it's too big a deal if we're just going over stuff again. Besides, if something comes up, we can always just tell them later. Agreed, Yuina says, and he leans over to place a hand on Arata's shoulder. And regardless, you seem as though you need an outlet. Several heads nod. We'd be more than happy to be a listening ear, Minori adds. Arata lets out a sigh. His team, his best friends. Where would he be without them? They gather up at the table again, readjusting themselves to be more attentive and clearing off the top of it to make sure there aren't any distractions. In other words, it feels like business as usual. A quick team meeting, getting their bearings together, and then moving forward with the investigation. There's no palace or jail to work on, but it still feels like things haven't changed. Alright, Genevieve begins leaping onto the table so that he can be at eye level with the rest of the team. Let's start at the beginning. Right, Arata nods. As you all know, Shiro Azumi died in the engine room of Mitsuyoshi Endo's cruise palace. Yeah, Ryoto heaves a heavy sigh. Hard to forget about that. He was the perpetrator behind the mental shutdowns and psychotic breakdown incidents, Hatsumi follows up, but had been doing so at the orders of Endo, his biological father. In the end, he gave up his life so that we could move forward with our infiltration, Genevieve continues. We all may have had our issues with him, and we might not have gotten along, but that doesn't change the fact that he willingly sacrificed himself for us in the end. Pause as the memory resurfaces. There had been a barricade in the engine room, separating the spirit rogues from Azumi, with nothing but their voices and the sound of fists banging against the metal reaching him. It's a memory that still gets to Arata, even with knowing that Azumi is alright now. Maybe the professor is right. Maybe he just needs a moment alone to grieve and let himself feel. That, though, can come later. He puts the thoughts to the side and breaks the moment. We changed Endo's heart in his stead. For a good while, that's where things had ended with him. Until about a year ago. Somehow, Azumi was brought back. Not just that, he was dropped off in Inkwell, where I had been staying in order to lay low and keep off of the police radar for a bit. Oh, yeah, Adea hums. That's something we've got to take note of, isn't it? Whoever's behind this knew that you were all the way in Inkwell. Yes, Genevieve nods. It seems explicit because Azumi was found with some form of the Gia spell active on him. The order was to find and reconcile with Arata. The entire time between being brought back and their reunion, Azumi had been trying to find Trickster. Several of them grimaced right then. Not unusual, especially considering Yeddo's cultural stance on enchantments, but also with the knowledge of how Azumi feels about being regarded as a puppet, a means to an end. While an abhorrent method, does give us more insight into who Azumi's mysterious benefactor is, Yuina says. Not only do they know that Arata had been in Inkwell, but that he is Trickster, and that he and Azumi had a close relationship. At the moment, Minori nods. That means our list is currently anyone who is related to us, the Spirit Rogues. Anyone who has helped provide something for our operations is a suspect. Another moment of silence. A feeling in Arata's chest blossoms like a bloodstain in snow. Actually, Hatsumi chimes in, can't we narrow it down further from there? There has been a lot more that have come to light recently. Right, Genevieve agrees. Apparently, this benefactor has been pretty busy. A lot of things have been happening here in Okashima. Rumors of scholarships being handed out and new business ventures being successful despite previous troubles, among other things that we and the rest of the investigation have heard. Normally, these would be really good, but we've all agreed that these are suspiciously out of nowhere. These things don't just happen without a lot of effort and work put into them. We can't ignore what Joseph told us earlier, either. Minori supplements that the Paraverse seems to be odd recently, with the odd flavors of flowers he's been finding lately. Oh, yeah, that reminds me, Ryoto cuts in. About the Paraverse. Azumi died in the palace, right? Wouldn't that mean someone would have had to get him out to revive him? There were traces of necromancy on him when we checked the first time, as Arata murmurs. So that means our list would have to include people who know about the Paraverse, Minori nods. She leans against the table, thinking, before she reaches to grab one of the notebooks and begins to write something down. That brings us to Boss, Sai, Dr. Masaru, and Ichie-san. If we consider Yosef's idea that our culprit is someone who's been directly helped by the spirit rogues, and their methods, either directly by a change of heart or indirectly, that brings us to Boss, Sai, and Ichie-san. Well, Adea hums, we can already cross Ichie-san off the list. She hasn't been sticking around Okashima long enough, and I'm pretty sure Isabella would have told us if she noticed that she was acting strange. She would know better than to try and tamper with the Paraverse a second time as well, Yuina agrees. Satoru isn't the kind of person who'd go as far as messing with cognitive science to make people happy, Ichika adds. Besides, he is a lot more concerned with keeping the cafe running and the rest of us safe. It really doesn't seem like something he'd want to mess with, considering... Arata makes a vague gesture, as if that could indicate Satoru's entire relationship with Makoto Itoyu. Regardless, Ichika nods in agreement. And Sai doesn't have any means of magic, Minori supplies. She doesn't have any dunamancy magic, and that is probably also the biggest factor in all of this. In fact, if we try to account for that specific detail, none of these suspects fit that criteria. In other words, Ichika sighs, we're back to square one. Could we be thinking a little too inside the box? Hatsumi posits. Though, there aren't a lot of people who would know Arata and Nozumi-san's relationship outside of those we know. In the lull of the conversation that follows, Arata pauses to think. People have been getting things they want, almost like the granting of wishes. Wish is a versatile enough spell, he supposes, but someone going around casting it so often likely would have drawn a lot more attention, not to mention how powerful it is. Granting of wishes, especially after going through a stressful or turbulent time. He has to wonder what the end goal is. It would probably benefit them to see if there is a way to contact the faces of these rumors, to see if some sort of deal or exchange was made behind closed doors. Even with all the good that's been happening, it's entirely possible that something is going on that other people just don't know about. But even so, how would they even go about asking for something like that? Strangers coming up to just ask about your recent success? Maybe he ought to ask Wiki about it later. He thinks of the Paraverse. Contracts made in order to make use of it? It's too similar to how Endo's method of enacting the mental shutdowns operated. But even so, by altering cognition, one could alter an entire reality. Something about the idea makes his stomach churn. The haze around the edges of their answer suddenly becomes clearer. Cognitive science, after all, is not a commonly practiced field of study, so it does make sense for their culprit to be incredibly new at this. Briefly, he pauses to sort through what he actually knows about it as a scientific field, what is known publicly and what isn't. Most of it comes from listening to Masaru ramble about it in regards to his research and the little they as a group found out from whatever scraps of notes had been left behind by Ichika's mother, but... Maybe there is merit to asking Masaru if he knows of any other individuals who have recently dove into the field, As niche as it is, it seems as though he'd be likely to know, right? You know what really gets me about all of this? Ryoto starts back up, stretching his arms and back before he leans against the table again. Whoever's doing all of it doesn't look like they're doing it out of, like, an malice or anything. It's just good things for the people who want them. It ain't like any of the shitty adults we've faced in the past. Hatsumi perks up, tilting her head in his direction. Are you thinking of something, Ryoto-kun? I don't know. He shrugs, one hand scratching at the side of his chin. I'm not sure if it's anything, but... Hey, didn't we toss around the idea of this guy having their own sort of issues? Do you think that we could be dealing with a jail this time? That doesn't seem likely. Yuina shakes his head and Arata dips his head in agreement. If there were, it would probably be localized in Okishima, and Isabella has been nearby long enough to let us know by now. Ryoto sighs. Yeah, guess so. No way she would have sent something and not told us. Not only that, Minori sighs. As far as we know, it doesn't seem like anyone else is acting strangely. In fact, the only strange thing about all of this is that things just have been happening so suddenly in order to provide satisfactory solutions out of nowhere. That might not be manipulation of desires, just manipulation in general. So, Adea starts, a brow furrowing. Do you think it's just a palace, then? Don't see why not. Ichika pulls her knees onto her seat. I mean, you don't really have to be a jerk to have a palace. We already kind of know that. She makes a gesture towards herself with one hand, silently indicating her own palace. Right, Genevieve agrees. Palace doesn't necessarily mean rotten. It just means that the palace's ruler's heart is so distorted that their perception of the world around them is warped enough to distort the paraverse. Wait, hang on. Go back a second, Arata says, finally finding his voice as his thoughts catch on to something. Back to the thing Minori brought up about things happening so suddenly. Huh? Minori blinks. What about it? He rubs a hand against his forehead in an attempt to figure out how to word what he's thinking of. It's something about how our reality is as we perceive it is always affected by our cognition. Is it possible for a palace to be so distorted it can directly affect others on the material plane? A silent pause as the others glance towards each other in consideration. Within the span of a second, almost every person present has a similar thought. Do you think the culprit is corrupting other people's cognitions? Yuina asks first. Wait, Ryoto interjects, glancing between the thoughtful looks everyone else appears to have. That can't be possible, right? It depends, Genevieve answers. If a person is distorted enough, they could try to inflict that distortion on others. We have technically seen something like this already, Hatsumi adds, though it wasn't exactly a palace that belonged to just one person. Huh? Ryoto blinks. Wait, you mean Remembrance? If enough people have the same distorted views, it stands to reason it would spread through the collective unconscious, Minori says. Just like with what happened to the depths of Remembrance. So many people were convinced that listening to a higher power would be much better than the burden of choice. Their shadows willingly allowed themselves to be imprisoned because they thought the Holy Grail would protect them from that burden. In a similar vein, why wouldn't a singular palace be able to distort the paraverse around it? People will believe in an idea if it's told convincingly enough. It's a phenomenon that happens often in the real world. Arata briefly remembers something, helping Chinatsu combat an organization that amassed a following simply because their leader was an excellent public speaker and provided a false comfort by selling fake luck stones. He frowns at that statement because Minori is right. People will often flock to whoever can offer an idea if it can provide an easy answer, an easy way out of the situation, or an easy comfort. So we'd be looking for a palace, Ichika's hums. Probably one that's got enough distortion to affect remembrance, too. Considering how localized all these events have been, it's probably somewhere here in the city. Adea groans. Ugh. Somewhere in the city is still a pretty big scope, though. We'd have to figure out a way to narrow it down still. Something niggles at the back of Arata's mind, but the thought slips before he can grasp it. Without knowing who the palace would belong to, Yuina hums. Narrowing down where it could be would be nigh impossible. Maybe we could find out in a roundabout way, Genevieve replies. If we could find evidence of something influencing remembrance, maybe? But we already checked remembrance, Ryoto points out. The only thing that's been weird about it is what Joseph's told us already. Well, Minori corrects. We've only checked remembrance in Nogashima. Considering where Sumi ended up, it might be in our best interest to check Inkwell's too. Ichika snickers. Well, if we're gonna be heading back to Inkwell anyway. A silence befalls the group at that moment. It takes a second, too, and then Arata jolts. Wait. Gotcha. Arata huffs at Ichika's laughter. Genevieve, in the meantime, lets out a yowl. What do you mean you guys are coming over to Inkwell? We were going to tell you, Hatsumi giggles. There's no spirit rogues without our leader and Paraverse expert, after all. So we decided to save up to visit as often as we can. Yeah, Adea agrees, especially if you guys are going to keep finding new members. In actuality, Minori says, it's hard to deny that we've missed close friends of ours. And with the investigation still open-ended, we figured it'd help both of our personal preferences and the situation if we could meet more often. And then we thought it'd be fun to surprise you two. Yeah, consider me surprised. We won't be going with you, and it won't be for a while, Minori continues. But we'll try to let you know when we'll be visiting beforehand. We could make exploring remembrance our first objective when we get there. Arata lets out his light-hearted, amused sigh. Really, what would he do without these people? Speaking of, Ryoto interrupts suddenly, reaching over to playfully shove Arata's arm. You're gonna be heading back soon, and we still haven't done anything for your birthday. Come on, man. We gotta send you off on a good note. He holds back from saying that he doubts the other rogues are capable of ending his visit on anything but a good note. You know, there's this festival happening over in Otaimu, and there's going to be a whole bunch of food stands over there. We should check it out. Genevieve rolls his eyes. There Ryoto goes again, always thinking about food. Hey! I agree, Yuina hums, closing his eyes in what one can only describe as a very pleased expression. Eating traditional food at a festival is a very fitting way to end a chapter, wouldn't you say? Ichika snorts. There goes Inari too. And it's all Arata can do when he chuckles, losing himself in the familiarity and comfort of being amongst his closest friends. It's a relief to know that, even with all that's been happening, it's the same as it's always been. And thank you, everybody, for listening in, both now and in the future. With that, I bid you all a good time zone. Bye-bye!